I welcome you to today's webinar, the VSBA School Board U webinar. Today, as you know, our topic is budgeting and financial oversight. I know we're a little late into the budgeting season this year, but there's a lot going on. I just want to introduce who is on the line with me today. I, of course, am Susan Holson, Director of Education Services at VSBA. We have Sue Siklowski, our brand new Executive Director, on with us. Sue, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
And Carrie Lamb, Director of Operations.
Hi, everybody.
Their audio is off a little bit. Please bear with us. Technical difficulties. If you have any, please call Carrie at either of those numbers throughout the program. She will do her best to monitor this and also take care of you on the phone. We're also joined today by Sheila Valley, who is a CPA with Fothergill, Siegel and Valley. She is the auditor for VSBA and also a number of school districts around the state. She's going to be able to bring us the perspective of the nitty-gritty of the financials. Thank you for joining us today, Sheila. I know we've got a little audio issue. You're coming in very quietly for me, so I may repeat what you're saying to make sure everybody can hear it. So let's get into it. As we all know, one of the important jobs of a school board is to make sure that the school district has the resources it needs to ensure that all our students have a high quality education, but we also have a responsibility to the taxpayers, and we're accountable to them for a good return on their investment. And of course, that's a little bit subjective, and also to make sure that we are conducting business legally. And after the budget process, we then have the responsibility, again, because we're accountable to the taxpayers, of monitoring our financials. And this can be a little daunting for board members who are not accustomed to looking at financial statements. Oh, I was talking about the video that we have on the website. If you're unsure about the fundamentals of how your tax rate is established based on your education budget, that is a resource available to you, and hopefully it will help you. If that's confusing, you can talk to your business officer, you can call me, we'll walk you through. But there are aspects of that local boards control. There are pieces that come from the state, but the critical piece in terms of the math is the reasonableness of your cost per pupil. And that's something that is calculated based on the budget that you lay out, but you can back into it also. So you can start with, this is our target cost per pupil, and we need to keep it at that, and let's work backwards to develop the budget. You can also base it on projected tax rates. You can base it on your education priorities, but then you probably are going to find yourself having to verify your priorities and perhaps adjust accordingly. Or you can give broad financial guidelines like a 2% increase in spending or that kind of thing year over year. So then it goes back to administration, and in the process of finalizing the budget, they come to you with a preliminary budget. As I mentioned before, you work together to figure out how to accomplish the financial goals that you need to accomplish in order to satisfy your public. And also to make sure that the district's needs are being met, that it's fiscally responsible. You have to sort of take the temperature of your community before you put the budget out to the public. Then the board adopts the adopts the budget and goes forward to the public and presents this budget to the community with connection to the district priorities and vision. And hopefully the electorate then, after analyzing what you've provided to them, accepts and votes in your budget. Now, this is done at different times and in different ways across different districts. Many districts hold budget forums, either before or after the budget has to be warned. If it's before the budget needs to be warned, there's an opportunity to make minor modifications if indeed that's what's indicated from hearing from your communities. Now, going into all of this, there are a couple of other parameters, and I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to try and keep this at a sort of a easy level to talk through. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers, but we just received the letter from the tax department. The legislature just received the letter from the tax department, which the tax department is required by statute to provide on or before December 1st, that provides some of the best estimates of components that figure into that local tax calculation. And at the risk of making this oversimplified, these yield numbers are a basis for calculation that are benchmarks. Not that anybody expects this to be your actual spending, but these are mathematical component of the calculation. And as you can see, those numbers have gone up slightly from FY20 into projected for FY 2021. Similarly, they base on those yields and what the tax department assessed as a likely 5% increase in education spending statewide. They're looking at tax rates of $1.567 for homestead and 2.55% for income. So I've calculated there for you the increase in the tax rate. Now, that tax rate then gets applied to the appreciation in property value and growth in income, as this quote from that December 1st letter indicates. So they're basing this on a 5% increase in education spending and what the tax department is projecting as property value growth, which calculates into the common level of appraisal used again as part of this calculation, and also growth in income, because actually 2/3 of Vermonters pay their property taxes and they pay their education taxes based on income. So when you're figuring out your calculation, make sure you take a look at that also and share that with your community as you're presenting your budget to them. I'm going to take a deep breath right here and just check in. Are there questions at this point?
Why 5%, someone said?
I do not have an answer for that. Every year in that December 1st letter, the tax department puts a number in. I don't know how they come to that number. For the last number of years, school boards around the state have not reached the level that they're projecting, which of course then, these are all preliminary numbers. So if statewide we come in at 3% instead of 5%, that will have a positive impact on your tax rates. Okay, the other thing that's going on right now is the statewide healthcare commission negotiations, which obviously will have an impact both on your contractual negotiations with your faculty, your teachers, but also will have an impact on your budget. And so the VSBA has a tentative workshop schedule to talk about how the healthcare resolution is going to work into negotiations. That we don't know yet. The commissioner is supposed to have a response from their arbitration as to which which healthcare plan is going to be adopted after 6 months of negotiation between employer and employee commissioners. Sue, do you want to speak about the whole idea of the statewide healthcare and how it's going to impact budgets?
Sure. The statewide healthcare negotiations have gone to arbitration, and right now we're waiting for the arbitrator to issue a decision. That decision is by statute required to be one of the last best offers that was submitted. So the employer commissioners submitted the last best offer, and the employee commissioners submitted a last best offer. And I believe the arbitrator will be issuing a decision by December 15th. So that is coming up quite soon. And I know that business officers school districts are looking at those two last best offers in order to prepare their budgets. They know what aspects of those offers are in common and where they differ. And based on that, they are preparing numbers based on both of those, and so that when the decision comes out, they'll be able to move forward. So everyone is waiting for that decision.
Thanks. And after we have that decision, as you can see, as early as January 6th, we are hoping to put on these live workshops around the state, ending with a February webinar for those of you who can't make it to your local meeting. This is a very tentative schedule. I got on the bottom of the slide here that you can register on our website.
There are actually 3 questions. The first one says, when will the final decision be made?
The final decision comes down to on or before December 15th.
Okay, and then is there a way to find out how many households in the district receive state discounts on taxes?
I don't have that data. The tax department may release that if you want to get in touch with them directly. It's not published information that I'm aware of. So we use the statewide average, but of course that's an average. So there are many communities where it's much higher and other communities where it's lower. Hope that helps.
It's have the amounts been released for this year?
Okay, so that's that December 1st tax letter. So they've just been released, and these are the numbers that your business officers will be working with for purposes of calculating projected tax rates based on the budget that you are discussing. So there's a lot of wiggle room in there, and unfortunately, those tax rates, it's sort of a chicken and egg situation. So they release these in December. We use them to share our budget with our communities and our projections on taxes based on those budgets. But the amounts aren't really finalized until all school budgets have been received by the state so that they know how much they actually need to fund. And that's why if collectively we come in below that 5% of a spending increase, those numbers should get better.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions we have right now.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, so what do we do with all of that information? Once we have that budget, now what, right? We've got the budget, it's been approved. Now what do we do with it? So the board plays a really important role in monitoring how that money is being utilized. And Sheila, I invite you to jump in here anytime you've got anything to contribute. So the board's role is to make sure that those resources are used as planned, which means, well, that they're going to accomplish the mission that your budget is focused on accomplishing. You need to know how to look at management level financial statements and make sure that things are going as expected and that you will have enough money in the budget to pay for all of the services that are planned in the work plan for the district. And so you need to compare what's actually happening with what you thought was going to happen, the budget reflecting, of course, what you thought was going to happen. And then the board also in statute is required to engage an independent auditor to review your finances. I believe it's annually, but there are certainly districts that use that service more frequently. Is that correct, Sheila?
So in the state of Vermont, you are required to have an annual independent audit.
Great.
So it has to be annual.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say a little something on the financial
Sure.
statements? One of the things that's very important from the school board is they always get a budget to actual report, which shows what the revenue has come in, what the expenses, how they've been spent according to budget. But one of the things that it's very important that I think that the boards look at is ask questions. Are the cash reconciliations done timely? Are all of our receivables for grant revenues, for other revenues, tuition receivables booked? Are all our payables booked? Because if you're given information that those items are not done timely, what you're looking at are not accurate. They could be very misleading.
Right.
So you got to be proactive with asking questions, making sure things are done timely.
And we'll talk more about making sure you know what you're looking at when we chunk this down and actually look at some sample financial statements. But yes, it's critical to know that you're comparing apples to apples.
Mm-hmm.
But so the board's role here is tricky because there's a temptation to want to get down into the nitty gritty and see exactly every line item in a financial statement and how we're doing according to budget. But that's not really the job of the board. The board is should be looking at a budget from a high level to make sure that we're moving towards the goals. So if one of the goals is related to early literacy and you're not seeing that the amount that you've got budgeted is actually moving the needle on your early literacy, then next budget season, you're going to want to cycle back and have that conversation again. But in the meantime, you're also wanting to make sure that the money that you had allocated is being well used. So that's where the financial statements come in. And again, I've got a couple of financial policies referenced here, and those are about the accounting practices and the reporting practices. Some boards look at statements all the time, every meeting. Some boards look at them quarterly. Sometimes there's a finance committee that reviews them more frequently. It runs the gamut, but it should be in policy, and your board then can comply with its own policy. So the role of the board in authorizing expenditures, and Sue, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. There is statute 16 VSA section 563 subsection 8 that allows the board to authorize either a subcommittee, the superintendent, or a designated employee of the school board to look at the claims against the district for school expenses. Those are the bills, and draw orders that allow payment to the party that has submitted the bills. So we wanted to make you aware of the board's ability to authorize a subcommittee, the superintendent, or a designated employee to do that, because there are some boards that aren't aware of that and spend a fair amount of time at their meetings going over all of the bills and the orders.
Which really isn't a great use of meeting time. And though the board ultimately has responsibility there, as this says and Sue just outlined, you can delegate that and just get a summary, which serves that high level monitoring quite well.
Someone said our auditor told us we needed to sign orders.
The whole board needs to sign the order? No.
Can the subcommittee be just one person?
I would recommend that the subcommittee not be one person. It could be two or three people from the board, depending how big your board is. There could be one person to authorize it, but I don't think one person should be on that subcommittee. So if it's one person, it should either be the superintendent or a designated employee of the school board.
Okay, I'm going to read you several questions that came in regarding that same thing.
Okay.
The first question was, our auditor told us we need to sign the orders, and the same person responded and said 2 members of their board need to sign the orders. The next question was, does that person mean warrant signer? And the last question is a board member eligible to be a sole person to examine claims? So I'm glad to answer
Okay. So I can answer the question about warrants. Warrants and orders are the same thing.
Okay.
So yes, it does mean warrant signer.
Okay.
And the auditor may not have been aware of this statute that allows authorization of a subcommittee or the superintendent or a designated employee. I'm guessing if they said that 2 board members needed to sign.
Okay. Is that something that they need to, at their reorganization, they need to delegate who will be the signer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that needs to be voted on by the entire board.
All right. And then is a board member eligible to be the sole person to examine the claims, which I'm assuming means the warrants?
Right. No. It would have to be a subcommittee, which would be more than 1 person if it's board members.
Okay. Thank you. That answers all of them.
Great. Thank you both. So the administration's role in the finances is preparing the monthly orders, and we don't expect that the superintendent is doing this personally, right? It's delegated. And to deliver those orders to the designee, to make sure that the checks get sent to the treasurer for signature and distribution, that the general ledger is maintained properly, and that the monthly financial statements are prepared and distributed to the school board and the treasurer. And again, most districts have a business officer that handles these as the delegate of the superintendent, but that varies from district to district depending on the size of your district and the size of your central office staff. But those are functions that are taken care of by the administration. The role of the treasurer, this has come up, and that's why I've got this included here. So the treasurer is elected, and the default, if there is no election, Sue, correct me if I'm wrong here. Okay. Actually, why don't you just address this since it's all based in statute?
Sure. So the default for a town school district is that the town treasurer is the school district treasurer. The electorate does have the option to elect someone else, and it cannot be a school board member. If you are a unified district, I believe it's 16 VSA 706Q addresses the powers of the treasurer and says that their powers, duties, and liabilities are the same as the town school district treasurer. So it refers you back to that original statute as to the role of a union district treasurer. And the duties of the treasurer are to sign the checks as authorized by the board or its designee, as we just talked about, invest in a prudent manner, and reconcile monthly accounts with the supervisory union or supervisory district.
Great. Are there questions, Carrie, that we want to address at this point?
No, I do not have any at this time.
Great, thank you. Okay, and part of the reason that so many different people need to be involved here is to make sure that lots of different eyes have the opportunity to control. So checks and balances. So the school board approves the expenditures as in the budget, and also for very large expenditures, there's usually a policy in place. The administration prepares the warrants and checks, and the treasurer of the school district releases the funds. So that's a summation of those parties and their involvement. So let's go back to the school board piece of all of that. In order to understand what a financial statement is showing you, there's a lot of buzzwords in finance, as there are a lot of buzzwords in education. And so let's break that down a little bit. The first thing, as Sheila mentioned earlier, you want to make sure you know what time period you're looking at, and that should be really clearly stated. There should be dates on your financial statements. The abbreviation YTD, year to date, is a handy one. If you aren't familiar with it, I find myself using it out of financial context all the time. The budget is the dollar amount as adopted by the board and then approved by the electorate. Actuals are what you're really spending, what's really happening day in and day out. And there, as Sheila mentioned before, there's a timing element to that. And it's important that, for example, bills be paid in a timely manner so that the expense that was allocated gets reflected in the time period in which it was supposed to happen. It's easy to I hope nobody's doing a lot of this personally, but it's really easy to just not pay your bills and then your bank account looks healthy. But eventually it's going to come back and bite you. Another term that is often shown in school district financials particularly is the term encumbrance. And that's the money that's already been committed. Even if it hasn't been paid yet, you're on the hook for it. So you don't have that money available to be spending on something else. And it's helpful to have that designated and identified so you can see what's really available at any point in time. And your reporting, particularly the frequency of your reporting, needs to be in accordance with your own district policy. So here's a sample. These, by the way, these statements that I'm showing you are from actual districts. And I picked fiscal 18, but it could be fiscal 2021 too. So you see the functions going down the left side, the budgeted amounts, actual, and the variance. What's wrong with this picture is you don't know what the time frames are. So the budget is probably an annual number, typically, but year to date in March, the variance, meaning how much different the actual is from the budget, is pretty irrelevant here because you're comparing 6 or 5 months of actuals to an annual budget. So be wary.
I think they're doing 9 months.
I'm sorry?
Most school districts have a June 30 year end. So if this says March 31st, 2018, they're looking at 9 months.
Yes, thank you very much. But my point still applies.
Yes.
If you're comparing an annual number to less than annual actual, your variances showing you how you're doing don't mean very much.
Correct. This is where the encumbrance is, right. This is where the encumbrance is.
Here's an alternate, which adds in that whole concept of encumbered. So you're seeing what your annual budget is, you're seeing your 9-month actual expenditures, and you're also seeing the amount that you know is still coming, even though it hasn't been billed or paid yet. So doing that math, what's left from the budget, so you take the budget, subtract the actuals and the encumbered, and so that is showing, that unencumbered column is showing you what has yet to be spent and or committed, which isn't to say that it's unplanned money, because some expenses are anticipated monthly, but they're not contractually committed. So those would not be included in that encumbered column. And then this particular statement shows you what that unencumbered is as a percent of the original budget. And that can be a useful calculation if you know where you are in the year. So how much of the year have you not had yet? In this case, it's 25%, right? There's 3 months left in the fiscal year, April, May, and June. 3 out of the 12 is 25%. So as you look at those unencumbered numbers and you think about it in terms of the flow of a year, there may be reasons, good reasons, why some of these numbers are way below 25%, because you don't snowplow in the summer, and there may be good reasons why some of them are way high. But when you see something like that transportation line, where you're 50% overspent already, well, let me rephrase that, where your unencumbered is a negative number, that means you are in the hole on that line. That's a question I would be asking. Those are the kinds of questions that you want to ask your administration when you're reviewing these financials. Can you tell us what's going on here? And more importantly, how are you addressing this? Because that's really the piece. that's most significant to the board? How is this being handled? So again, just to sort of wrap that piece up, what's being measured? How frequently are you looking at it? So maybe the subcommittee is seeing it monthly and sharing it with the full board quarterly. So at least you've got your checks and balances in place. And, you know, by and large, I'd say that's probably a pretty good schedule. But some boards want to, the whole board wants to see everything monthly. That's fine too. But just know what you're looking at in terms of timing and in terms of how much of that annual budget is really relevant at that time period. And then look at how you're doing compared to your budget once you are able to compare apples to apples and ask those hard questions. What's going on here? Now, the superintendent, the administration is not responsible to the board on a line item by line item basis. So they may be way over in one line and way under in another. And as long as that's being managed well, that's within the parameters of the budget that your voters approved. But it's on the board to make sure it's being managed well. Not to manage it, but to make sure that the professional experts are on it. You also want to look at trends. So if you are exceeding your special ed, for example, wildly exceeding what you had in your budget, you want to know what's going on there. And that's one, that particular item is one that can fluctuate wildly and unpredictably. If high needs students move into the district that weren't there last year and all of a sudden we're providing services for them, that changes the complexion of that expenditure substantially. And there may be explanations. And if there are explanations that make sense to you, you're okay. But if there aren't, then you want to drill down. And again, make sure you understand that that your management, your administration has plans for addressing these variances. Also, when you look at the financial statements you're getting from your business office, are you getting the information that you need? I go back to that first sample we looked at, and you're really not. That was a pretty pointless report. You're not really getting what you need to know, which is how are we doing on our spending based on our plan for spending. And what else do you need to know in order to do your job well, which is to oversee that money is being utilized in the way it was intended and managed well as you go. Sheila, do you have any other thoughts on how non-financial professionals can approach a financial statement in this context?
Most school districts receive the type of statement that you showed, the second one, I believe, where they do show the encumbered. And that, like you said, Susan, that's very helpful. However, you know, a basic everyday person wants to know, do we have enough cash to support the expenses? How are we doing? Is other questions that really should be asked that you're not really going to see given that budget to actual report, because it's just a snapshot in time. So I would ask some basic questions. Like I said earlier, are cash reconciliations being done timely? You know, there has to be open communications. Is there staff turnover? You know, based on those answers, I might be asking a little bit more questions about the financial statements based on how I'm given those answers. So if I know if there's a turnover in staff, oh boy, I might be a little bit more suspicious of the numbers.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there questions coming up about how to look at these financial statements?
No, there are no questions at this time.
We must be doing a great job here, Sheila and Sue.
As far as the financial statements, you want to have accurate financial statements. So when the auditors come in, you know, there should be very little adjustments. You want to be able to look at the audited financial statements and see if the report is a unmodified report. That means your district's doing well. You want to make sure that the internal controls have been reviewed. You can ask the auditors, you know, what type of risk assessments did you use? You should ask about the audit procedures that were done. It's up to the board to ask the questions and to review the management letter that the board is required to receive from the auditors, and that kind of tells you how well the audit went. And you should always ask questions of how the audit went. Did you have any trouble with management? Were there any accounting issues? You should always ask those questions.
Can you address just really superficially, what is the purpose of the audit?
The purpose of the audit is to basically give you I'm going to use the word gold stamp on the financial information of the school district. It also looks at internal controls. Recommendations are made if there's some weaknesses. If you're having a single audit compliance report, if you have federal dollars over 750,000, that's a different type of audit, which we have to do a compliance audit, making sure that you're adhering to what the grant is asking for. So, the audit basically is your overall checkup at the end of the year to make sure that you're in financial good shape. It will tell you how good the organization is.
Is there anybody out there who has questions about the audit or the board's role with respect to the audit?
Yes, I have one question. It says, how frequent are audits?
They're usually by the state of Vermont, they're once a year.
Conducted some reasonable amount of time after the end of a fiscal year so that all of the bookkeeping can be complete. Is that right, Sheila?
Usually, you're usually looking from a period of time, August through the end of the year, that audits are usually the field work and then completed.
So that's pretty much what we've got wrapped up. Any final questions on anything that we've talked about or anything related that we haven't talked about?
I have another question. Do auditors normally meet with the school board?
Okay, usually there should be some, at least, inquiry. A lot of school districts, we do meet with the school board or a finance committee or whoever they designate to talk to the auditors. If they have an audit committee, the auditors are required to meet with the audit committee. So you should be making some contact with the school board. The auditors should be.
All right. How should boards keep track of titles, funds, and spending?
By titles funds, is that special ed?
Or are they talking federal dollars?
I believe they're talking federal dollars, Sheila.
Typically, when federal dollars are accounted for, they're usually set up in a separate fund so that the revenue gets recorded and then the corresponding expenses. So those are pretty much, most school districts have either a grants coordinator or whoever that's kind of controlling the expenses of the grant and what, according to the budget that they have asked either the state for how they're going to spend the money, and they're the ones that are required to make sure that they're kind of spending within that grant. Is that kind of what the question was? It's usually kept in a separate fund, and it's usually pretty much controlled by the grant coordinator.
Yes, he says federal funds is what he was talking about. Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's typically how they're usually kept. It's someone who is administering the grants that really have control over those funds and have a budget, what they're going to be spending, salaries, benefits, if it's consulting services, whatever that budget made up of, that's what you have to spend that grant within those parameters.
Okay, I have another question. If a budget fails, is it the board's role to determine what to cut or the administration?
That's a combined activity, much as developing or reaching the final budget initially involves interplay between the board and the administration. It's incumbent on the board to make sure that you're not cutting something that's right at the heart of the vision or mission or plan for the year. But it's also incumbent on the administration not to suggest such a thing. That's a tricky process, because it really, generally speaking, the budgets that we put forth initially are the ones that we think really cover what we need to cover, and we've already shaped. So if there is a program that the administration is really championing and you've had feedback from the community that that's off base, well, then you need to include that input into that conversation.
Great. We have
Similarly,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say we have a lot of questions coming in now.
Good.
Would you like to go to the next one, or is there more for that one?
I was going to just add a little bit on that one, just to say that ultimately it's the board that needs to vote on the budget, but it's the responsibility of the administration to give them different options in the event that a budget doesn't pass, as to how they could address that.
Great. Okay. So the next question is, the cover letter of our audit says that they are not giving an opinion on internal controls. Should we be asking for a separate review of internal controls?
If you feel that you have issues with internal controls, I would, but that's not required from a Yellow Book audit.
But they could request it like every 3 years or something like that.
Well, they can. It'd be additional services, not part of the audit.
Mm-hmm.
During the course of a normal audit, we do look at internal controls, but we do not give an opinion on them.
Unless
we
requested.
would be at the audit. We would be at the school way too long for them to want us to be there.
Okay, the next question. How should a board handle year-end financial report after June 30th that shows a significant overspending?
Well, nobody likes surprises. And so this goes back to what Sheila was saying earlier. If the cash position has been managed in a way that those expenditures were stockpiled till the end of the year, you have a control problem, which doesn't help you for managing it for this year. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
The question says overspending, but you can overspend if you received additional revenues. So they might have overspent their budget, but they might have gotten $300,000, say, of additional revenues. So the question, I'm not quite sure if they're meaning after everything in, it's a deficit spending, or if they've overspent the budget. It's kind of two different questions.
Sounds like after the audit, the numbers changed. So I would think they'd want to find out what it was that changed it. What changed the numbers?
Right.
If
More than likely, it had something to do with payables not recorded.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, next question. What things should go onto an article instead of going into the budget? I'm thinking article means bond vote.
Right, or I'm thinking like special reserves. If you were going to do a capital, you wanted to have additional money for capital improvement, or right, you were going to do a bond. Those are separate articles. Trying to think if there's anything, maybe if they were offering a special career incentive package or something, maybe that was a special article.
I know in my home district, Sheila, the articles are often about the purchase of school buses.
Yep, exactly. Right, capital additions. Yep, definitely.
Okay.
And in that case, it's to answer the question, it's an expenditure that occurs over more than 1 year. So the payment of the annual obligation is included, like the interest on the loan is included in the annual budget. Am I right about that? But the
It should be, yes, that should be part of the annual budget.
right. But you need permission from your voters to spend into the future.
Yes.
Very interesting that actually while you were saying that, a message camp said, are bus purchases a bond item or are they a regular budgeted item? Can they be
pay
both?
for them all in one year. Well, if you're going to pay for the whole bus in 1 year, I guess then it becomes a budgeted item, but that's really unlikely. So like a car loan, you've got annual expenses associated with that loan. So you're paying it off over time. So you need the permission from the voters to commit to encumber future funds, but this year's payments are included in your debt obligations for this year.
Okay, I have another question. Our entire board currently signs all pay orders, which I'm assuming means warrants. Are you saying we could delegate this to a smaller group or entities based on the statute you quote?
That's a really simple answer. Yes.
That's what I was thinking, but I want to ask it. Yes, that's what we're saying. Okay, to address internal controls, isn't there an internal control questionnaire that is required to be completed by the superintendent and presented to the board annually?
I'm not aware of anything like that.
There's not a requirement, no. Typically, most auditors have a internal control questionnaire type things that they will review with the business manager, the superintendent, but it's not a requirement to go to the school board.
We have cleaned up all of the questions.
We want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for serving on your school board and the service that you provide to your communities and to the children of the state. And we also just want to remind you, we're on social media. We'd love for you to be following us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.